Wouldn't you love to be able to ask a pro-Second Amendment politician some key questions? Well, we're able to do exactly that today. And I don't mean kind of the lame ones. I mean some spicy ones, like are many Republicans faking it when they're talking about being pro-Second Amendment, what happens behind closed doors, and many others. Stick around. You're not going to want to miss this. We had the opportunity to sit down with Wisconsin State Representative Scott Allen, who is generously willing to answer our questions. As a note, I came up with a lot of these questions myself, but I also threw it out to you, the viewer, in our community tab. So if you're not a subscriber, be sure to check that out because you'll be able to participate in the programs as well. As always, let's get into it. Representative Allen, thanks for coming in today.
Absolutely.
So let's go big picture, and we're going to get into the spicy ones. Where do you see the Second Amendment going in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years?
The Second Amendment is always at risk. We know that there is a large and vocal opposition to the Second Amendment, and they are always coming after it. So we have to be ever vigilant to protect it. I have a feeling, just based upon times and circumstances where we've been, what we've seen over the last handful of years, that I think America's most violent years are in front of us. Probably in the next 5 years, we're going to see violence like we've never seen before. Our streets aren't going to be safe. And I think because of that, I think we're going to see a significant push to impose more gun control laws. So Second Amendment advocates need to be strong and need to be courageous.
I think a lot of Second Amendment advocates out there, by no means everyone, but there's a solid portion of them, the folks who may be reluctant to feel the need to vote, but they're looking at landmark U.S. Supreme Court victories in D.C. versus Heller, McDonald v. Chicago, New York Rifle Pistol Association v. Broom, that has codified the fact that it's an individual right. There's been some high guardrails put into place to protect the Second Amendment, who have felt like, look, we're good. I can conceal carry my firearm. I can go duck hunting or whatever the case may be. What do you see as the big battles ahead?
Well, we are still a country that's ruled by its people. And so as majorities change, our laws change, even our Constitution. Even decades-old Supreme Court cases, even recently, have been found to be no longer applicable. So while we think we can lock in some victories, they may last a decade or two or three, but it's not a lockstep guarantee. We have to be ever vigilant, and we have to do that by way of the polls, and we have to do that by way of mobilizing for elections, and we have to do that by way of making sure not just that we hold our own beliefs, but we share our beliefs and provide rationale and explanation to our friends and our family and our neighbors so that they can be educated and understand the issues. Otherwise, they are going to be susceptible to the mass media that we know simply parrots talking points by those who may be opposed to the Second Amendment.
You put your finger on another one of kind of my little touchstone issues, and it's one that I probably don't talk about enough. I feel like so many folks, when they're trying to, I don't know what the right term is, share the Second Amendment, evangelize the Second Amendment, defend the Second Amendment, whether it's arguments, debates, sitting down over Thanksgiving dinner with their family, I feel like so many people take, in my view, what is the wrong approach, which they just say, shall not be infringed, and as if it's, we're done. That's it. There's nothing you can say about that. And while that's not necessarily at all incorrect, I feel like it comes far, it stops far short of being the most effective response because there's so many statistics, there's so much logic, there's so much history that is on our side. What do you think about that? And I guess what do you think are some of the most effective ways of, so to speak, sharing the good news?
Yeah. Again, the Constitution has been amended, and it can be amended again. So it doesn't matter that it just says that in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights. It doesn't matter that it says that. It's important. It's a nice safeguard. But if we're going to advocate for that position, we need to explain the why behind it. Why is it important? I've got many anti-gun folks who, will advocate and say, well, but there's no need for a hunter to have an AR-15 or a multi-round whatever. I mean, they give me all this stuff, right? And I say, well, you obviously don't understand the purpose of the Second Amendment. They're like, what are you talking about? I'm a gun owner myself. I don't care if you're a gun owner yourself. You have to understand the genesis behind the Second Amendment. Why was it there? Well, to protect my right to have a gun. Well, yeah, not just to have a gun, but why did our founders feel it was so important to put it in the Bill of Rights? Why? Well, they can't answer me. I said, well, what was it that just happened immediately prior to that? We just went through a revolution where we overthrew the British government that was in control and that was imposing tyranny upon us. I mean, that was fresh in their minds. Now, I hope that we never get to a situation like that again, but we might. What if we had a tyrannical government? How could we, the citizens, have a revolution if it came down to that, if we were unarmed? That's the purpose behind the Second Amendment, not to protect your right to go hunting. It's to protect our right as citizens to have the government that we want. I hope we never have that situation, but the Second Amendment is there to protect it.
So I have to throw out this follow-up question because we all know what the standard response is. I can see it in the comment section already. But Representative Allen, how are you going to be able to fight the U.S. military? They've got F-35 jets. They've got F-16 jets for that matter. They've got tanks. They've got nukes. They've got all these different things. Without maybe going into an absurd level of detail, but how do you respond to that very common kind of clapback that we always see?
Yeah, why didn't we win the Vietnam War? We clearly had more firepower. Why didn't we win the Vietnam War? Why didn't we win in Nicaragua? An organized militia can create an opposition that can be insurmountable. So I'd rather have some firepower than no firepower at all.
Here's a question that I know a lot of folks threw up in the community tab, and one that I was going to ask slightly differently, but I'll put it to you like this. When pro-gun politicians come into the majority in office, obviously there are times, most recently here in Wisconsin, we are the second to last state to get concealed carry. We have castle doctrine now and so forth. There's lots of problems I have with the current existence of Wisconsin law, but not really necessarily the topic of this video. But just kind of, again, going wide lens, when pro-gun politicians become the majority party, why don't they do more in some people's eyes? Why don't they do more to advance the Second Amendment legislatively?
That's a good question. And if we're going to have an honest conversation, we have to recognize that when either party gets a majority, the final members of that majority come from districts where the win was hard fought. And what you might say, it would be a vulnerable district, right, where the majority is not guaranteed. And those members pay very close attention to the opposition. And they tend to moderate their votes. And so typical politicians, when they get in power, their focus is on retaining power. I loved what Scott Walker used to say. We want leaders who are more concerned about the next generation than the next election. And he said that because the propensity of a politician is to think about the next election, not the next generation. So if we know that that's the propensity, that's the answer to your question. That's those that are the new members of the majority are really focused on the next election. I'm not going to say they're not justified in that. You can very quickly lose a majority if you're not careful. So what they don't want to do is they don't want to be painted as an extremist. Again, their words or others' words. So they try to find that middle ground, the safe middle, I think the middle is the least safe place you can be, personally, but I understand it.
So you actually answered my follow-on question, which is why is there the instinct for people to kind of go towards the center as opposed to maybe go towards their base? You said something, I think in the other interview that we did about school shooters and legislatively what you're doing. So be sure to check that out, and we'll link it in the description box below. But you said something to the effect of that the anti-Second Amendment crowd is very passionate and in many ways much more organized. Can you go into that just a bit? And then the follow-on question, which is why isn't the pro-Second Amendment crowd nearly as passionate and organized?
So the primary tool of the anti-Second Amendment crowd, well, I'll call them the left, the primary tool of the left is shame and ridicule. They attempt to shame politicians into behaving the way that they want, suggesting that this is the normative and you are outside the norm. Therefore, you are extreme. This is what they try to do. And the more they say it, the more people are inclined to believe it. It is difficult for a right-leaning politician to remain steadfast in their beliefs when they constantly get ridiculed and shamed by the left. In the same respect, our friends on the right, our supporters on the right, are busy. They are occupied with family and work and business and church obligations. They're busy, and they elect representatives to do the job for them, and they trust that those representatives that they've elected are going to do that job. What they don't realize is that those politicians, those representatives on the right, are human beings, and they need encouragement. They need praise. They need recognition and reinforcement to keep steadfast. And the real question is, will they be willing to engage the politicians on the left on a regular, repeated basis? And really they haven't, and they don't, because they're busy. They got lives. They've got families. They've got stuff that they're doing. So it's hard, but it's that's the nature of where we exist and why it's so easy for otherwise by token pro-Second Amendment politicians to remain loyal and steadfast to the Second Amendment.
And what I'm hearing is people should, if you see your representative, you see your local assemblyman, if you see your local senator, whether on the state or federal level, or even just your local village or city board or county board, if you see them doing something that you want, if you see them doing something you like, give them a call. Reach out. Give them that touch, so to speak, so they know that you're out there. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
So I've saved kind of one of the spiciest questions for last, but before I get to that, I want to. You mentioned the left, so I'm seeing a new trend where there's a strong in the wake of 2020. I would say there's been a galvanizing effect among different groups who would self-identify on the left side of the political spectrum, who are actually turning out to be they're identifying as pro-gun. Now, I think that it's a lot of folks have called into question how pro-gun can you be, i.e., if you believe in overwhelming government power to kind of do things, and are you carving out a lane that says except for the Second Amendment, or does the Second Amendment kind of fall within that too? Without necessarily getting into that speculation, wondering if you were aware of that and what kind of reaction you had about that.
I'm not aware of that. That's interesting to me. I think we've a lot of people say, well, why can't the parties get along? Why can't you work together and compromise? And one of the things that I point out to people is that, it used to be that the Republicans and the Democrats were relatively close to one another. I mean, in terms of party philosophy and general objectives and so forth. And it was, in fact, there was sort of these shared objectives or shared goals with different approaches to accomplishing the same thing. That's how it sort of used to be. Today, it's entirely opposite of that. We don't share goals. Our goals are just diametrically opposed. And so having conversations about compromise are exceedingly rare and difficult these days because what they want to accomplish versus what we want to accomplish are two different things. And so where do you find compromise when the goals are different? And so I would be very interested in learning about those who are sort of the pro-gun advocates on the left. That'd be interesting for me to hear about.
And if you are, or if you know those people, I'd love to be able to talk to them. So I've actually invited a couple in for interviews, folks. So if you know those folks, I'd love to be able to sit down and just chat it up exactly as we're doing right now. We're going to get to the spicy question, but before we do, a couple things, folks. Of course, all the YouTube things. Be sure to show your support not only for this channel as well as the Second Amendment, but also Representative Scott Allen. Be sure to hit like, subscribe, comment. Comment below what kind of questions would you like to ask Representative Allen. If we get enough, and if he's generous enough, maybe we'd be able to pull him back in here. What are kind of your feedback for him? What would you love to be able to tell him or other, maybe your local politicians for where you are? Be sure to post that up. I'd love to be able to see and respond to that and take it in myself. So Representative Allen, here's kind of the spicy one. What percentage of politicians who represent themselves as being pro-guns in public when they're on the campaign trail, when they're talking to donors and all that kind of stuff, what percentage do you think are kind of faking it? In other words, yeah, on paper they're pro-gun, but if there's a cost to pay, they're not going to pay it. In other words, when push comes to shove, they're out.
Yes. Good question. Hard for me to come up with a number, of course. I'm reminded of John Fitzgerald Kennedy's book, Profiles in Courage. If you recall, he didn't spend a lot of time in the Senate before he was elected president. And his taste of the Senate gave him this glimpse of how rare courage is among politicians, on the right or on the left. There are many who are afraid to put out the bill similar to what I've recently put out with school safety. They wouldn't even think about co-sponsoring it. They'll support it. They'll vote for it. They want to have the voting record, but they lack the courage that's necessary to lead on issues. So, again, like we talked about earlier, there are certainly, every district is different. The composition of every district is different. We want to retain good legislators, and that means winning re-election. But when our entire focus is on winning that next election and not on affecting good policy, that is a lack of courage in my estimation. So, again, we're all human beings, so the more we can do to encourage those who might tend to be soft, the stronger we can make them. It's hard for me to speculate on what that percentage is. We oftentimes, quite frankly, don't have enough votes or enough pieces of legislation for me to get a good gauge. I can tell you who the really strong ones are, but I can't tell you really who the weak ones are.
And if you don't want to out folks in Wisconsin, I understand that, because I'm sure that you're plugged in nationally and across at least any number of other states as well. So if you want to cast a wider net as to not impugn colleagues or anything like that, if you did have a forced speculatory number about what that would be, what would you figure it is?
Number as far as the...
Like a percentage of folks who say, yep, I'm endorsed by the NRA, I'm pro-Second Amendment, but again, if push comes to shove, not happening. Or we've done enough for the Second Amendment voter already.
If I had to guess, maybe 20%.
We appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
You bet.
Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, please feel free to check out some of our other great content, and we'll see you in the next one.